My name is Eunice May Harwood. I am 78 years old. I've lived through harsh winters in Alaska, the loss of my first baby, the Vietnam War draft that almost took my husband, and years of working 2 jobs to raise my children. But nothing prepared me for the sting of what happened that cold October night, less than 24 hours after my husband, Walter, was buried beneath the snowy earth. The funeral had ended just the day before. My feet still ached from standing graveside, my eyes raw from crying. Walter and I had been married for 55 years. We met when I was just 22, both of us working in the cannery down near the docks in Kodiak. He was my first dance, my first kiss, and the only man I ever loved. He was gone now, just like that. The only thing I had left was the house he built with his bare hands and the memories we made inside it. That night, the house was too quiet. I wandered the halls in my robe, clutching Walter's old flannel shirt, trying to remember the way he used to hum when he watered the plants. My daughter Crystal, her husband Derek, and their 2 children had come from Anchorage for the funeral. They stayed behind to help me get my affairs in order. Or so I thought. Crystal came into the living room while I was sitting on the recliner, the one Walter always used, holding a steaming mug of tea with shaking fingers.
She didn't look at me when she spoke.
Her voice was flat. "Mom, we need to talk." Derek stood behind her, arms crossed, face hard like granite. "Yeah," he said. "You've been living here long enough. It's time you faced reality." My heart skipped. "What are you talking about?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Crystal's lips trembled, but she didn't soften. "You can't stay here. The house is too much for you. And, well, it's not your home anymore. Dad didn't leave anything in your name." That wasn't true. Walter left everything to me. He had told me so again and again. I kept the will in the drawer next to my bed, but I didn't even get the chance to mention it. Derek stepped forward. "We're moving in. We'll take care of the place. You should be in a retirement home anyway." I don't need. I tried to stand, but Derek grabbed my arm. Then it happened. He slapped me. It wasn't hard enough to knock me down, but it wasn't light either. My ears rang. My face burned. I tasted blood in my mouth. I couldn't breathe. "Get out," he snarled. "Right now." Crystal didn't stop him. She didn't cry. She didn't even blink. The snow was falling hard outside. The wind howled like a wolf. I stood in the driveway, coatless, holding only Walter's flannel shirt and the mug of tea that had gone cold in my hands. Behind me, the door slammed shut. Locked. My own daughter had shut me out. And just like that, I had nowhere to go. The cold didn't bite at first. Not because it wasn't cold, it was. Alaska in October isn't gentle. The sky was swollen gray, and the snowflakes were fat, falling fast, like even the heavens wanted to bury me. But when you've just been slapped by your own son-in-law and thrown out by the child you nursed through pneumonia, frostbite feels like a feather. I walked. I didn't know where I was going. My slippers sank into the slush as I trudged down the driveway, leaving a trail behind me like a ghost. I turned back only once. Just once. The porch light flicked off. They weren't even watching. I wasn't even worth a glance. As I wandered into the dark, my mind traveled further back, to the days when that very house was just timber, a plot of land, and a dream. Walter and I bought that land when we were 30. It cost us nearly everything we had saved. He drove a snowplow for the state, and I worked at a school cafeteria, dishing out chili and cornbread to teenagers who barely looked me in the eye. But we were happy. Poor, tired, but happy. We'd lay on the floor of that unfinished home, nails still scattered, roof still leaking, and whisper dreams to each other. "We'll raise her right here," Walter would say, rubbing my pregnant belly. "She'll ride sleds in the backyard and name every moose that walks past." He meant Crystal, our only child. She was born in that very house. I remember clutching Walter's hand and screaming so loud, the power lines outside trembled. And when she came into the world, pink and loud and perfect, Walter cried. Real tears. The kind you only cry once or twice in a life. She was our world. She loved Coco and snow angels. She used to fall asleep in Walter's arms during blizzards, her breath rising in tiny clouds as he read her the same bedtime story night after night. The Snowy Day by Ezra Jack Keats. But then she turned 13, and something shifted. I thought it was just teenage years. But as the seasons passed, she grew cold.
Distant.
She stopped joining us for dinner. She rolled her eyes when Walter kissed me on the cheek. She started calling our home boring, our lives small. Then she met Derek. He was 5 years older, already out of high school, already trouble. Wore leather jackets and had that wild, dangerous smile that girls fall for when they don't know better. We didn't trust him from the beginning. Walter once caught him poking around the tool shed and warned him to stay away. But love, if that's what it was, makes fools of the young. Crystal married him at 21. They moved to Anchorage, and little by little we heard less and less from her. Phone calls turned into texts. Then nothing. I mailed her Christmas cards, birthday checks, photos of her old bedroom we'd kept untouched. No response. It wasn't until Walter got sick that she finally came back. By then, he was withering, skin like parchment, eyes sunken but kind. He was still himself. Still cracked jokes. Still held my hand every night. But the cancer was a storm, and it never slowed down. Crystal stayed for the final weeks, acting like a dutiful daughter. Derek came too. I should have known then. He kept asking questions. Where's the will? Who owns the house? Did Dad put your name on it, or just his? I didn't want to believe they'd come for the house. For our home. But now, standing in the snow, I knew. They didn't come to grieve. They came to take. A horn honked nearby, startling me. I was still on the edge of the subdivision, outside the old post office that had long since shut down. The only light was from the tiny diner across the road, Lydia's. I'd eaten there with Walter once. On our 40th anniversary. The sign flickered. The windows were fogged. But it was warm. Open. I crossed the road slowly. Each step felt like I was walking through years, 40, maybe 50 of them. Steps that once would have been taken together. Now, taken alone. I pulled the door open, and a bell jingled. Inside, it smelled like bacon grease and coffee. A middle-aged woman with a streak of blue in her hair looked up from behind the counter. Her face softened when she saw me, red-faced, snow-drenched, holding nothing but a cold mug and an old flannel. "Ma'am?" she asked, coming around the counter. "You okay?" I didn't know how to answer, so I just stood there, trembling. The warmth of the diner wrapped around me like a mother's hug. And then, just like that, I fell. Not from weakness. From the weight of it all. As the waitress knelt beside me and called out for help, I whispered something to no one in particular. I built that house, and they left me with nothing. I woke up in a booth near the back of Lydia's diner, wrapped in a flannel blanket that smelled like lavender and French fries. A cup of tea sat in front of me, steaming gently, and someone had taken off my wet slippers and placed a pair of warm socks on my feet. For a moment, I thought I was back home, before the slap, before the betrayal, when Walter would leave tea waiting for me in the morning and hum as he made breakfast. Then I opened my eyes. The lights were dim, the booth's worn red vinyl, and old Johnny Cash played softly from a dusty jukebox in the corner. The diner was nearly empty except for a man at the counter nursing coffee and the waitress who had helped me earlier. "Hey there, sleepyhead," she said, smiling as she approached. Her name tag read Tess. "You gave me a scare. I had Jody call the clinic, but you didn't want to go. Said something about just needing to sit." I blinked, trying to sit up straighter.
I'm sorry.
I didn't mean to make trouble. Tess waved it off. "No trouble. You looked like you were carrying the weight of 3 winters on your shoulders. And judging by the tears on your cheeks, you weren't out walking for fun." I looked down at my hands. The tea mug trembled slightly. I hadn't cried, not really, not when the casket lowered, not even when Crystal turned her back. But Tess was right. Something inside me had cracked wide open. "I lost my husband," I whispered. She pulled a chair and sat across from me, gently. "I'm sorry, ma'am. Was he sick?" "Cancer," I said. "He was strong. Stronger than me. And then he wasn't. Tess nodded. My daddy died of the same. It breaks something in you, don't it? I nodded, then hesitated. Part of me wanted to tell her everything.
The slap.
The door slamming. The house I'd built with Walter being taken like it was nothing. But it felt too heavy to say aloud. Like speaking it would make it even more real. But something about Tess's eyes, the way she leaned in, like an old friend waiting to listen, made it spill out. I was thrown out, I said. My voice broke. By my own daughter. She said it wasn't my home anymore. Her husband, he hit me. Tess's eyes widened, but she didn't speak right away. She reached out and placed her hand over mine. It was warm, steady, grounding. I don't even have a coat, I whispered. Just this shirt. It was my husband's. The man at the counter had turned slightly, listening now. I saw his reflection in the window. Older, maybe in his 60s, long beard, weathered hands, blue-collar kindness etched into his posture. Tess finally said, "Well, sweetheart, that ain't right." None of it. I laughed, but there was no joy in it. What am I supposed to do? I have nothing.
Tess leaned in.
You have more than you think. She gestured behind the counter. That's Lydia's Diner, named after my grandmother. She built this place in the 60s with her bare hands after my granddad died in a snowmobile accident. People said she'd fail. Said no woman could run a business up here alone. But she did. She fed the whole town for years.
She paused.
Eunice, right? I nodded. Well, Eunice, you look like the kind of woman who knows what it means to fight for things. To keep going when no one's looking. I don't know what your daughter's going through, but I do know this. People like you don't just disappear. You stand back up. A silence settled over the booth. Then from the counter the man spoke. I'm Boyd. I do odd jobs around town. Plumbing, shoveling, fixing up snow tires. If you need a place for the night, my sister owns a little boarding house down on Miller Street. It ain't the Ritz, but it's warm. I'll cover the first 3 nights. I looked at him, stunned. Why would you do that? He sipped his coffee, then said, because my mother raised me right. And she looked just like you. Proud and tired. The kindness broke something in me again. This time, I cried. Not quietly, fully. Years of holding it in. Years of working without complaint. Years of giving Crystal everything. I cried not just for what I lost, but for what I'd allowed. When I finally stopped, I whispered, "Thank you." Tess stood up. It's not charity.
It's respect.
That night, I slept in a tiny room with yellowing wallpaper and a space heater that hummed like a lullaby. I laid Walter's flannel on the pillow beside me and whispered, I'll fix this, Walt. I promise. They don't get to take everything. And that night, for the first time in a long time, I started to plan. It took 3 days of silence. 3 days of boiling my own tea in a boarding house kettle, wearing the same clothes, and pretending I wasn't angry. But I was. Not loud anger. Not fire. Something colder. Sharper. Like the snow outside. I wasn't going to cry anymore. I was going to get my house back. The plan started small. I remembered something Walter used to say. If you ever need to prove what's yours, you better keep the paper in the drawer no one thinks to check.
He was talking about the will.
The real one. We signed it together 2 winters ago, with old Mr. Kellerman from the church acting as witness. Walter insisted, after the pneumonia scare, that everything be clear. The land, the house, the bank account, all to me. Not to Crystal. Not to Derek. But he hadn't told Crystal. Said she didn't need to know until she needed to know. Well, now she thought she knew. She believed, stupidly, that since the deed was in Walter's name and no one had mentioned me in the funeral, it meant she could just move in and erase me like a line from a chalkboard. But I still remembered where he hid the envelope. So on the 4th day, I borrowed a coat from Tess, brown wool, missing a button, and asked Boyd to drop me off 2 blocks from the house. He raised an eyebrow. You sure about this? I need to see something, I said. He didn't ask questions, just nodded and drove off slow. I stood in front of my own home. The wreath from the funeral was gone. In its place, Crystal had hung a cheap, "Welcome Autumn" sign with glittery pumpkins. I felt a rage in my ribs. Not because she redecorated. Because she was pretending. Pretending I never existed. I waited until I saw Derek leave in the truck. Crystal was likely inside, probably upstairs in what used to be my sewing room, scrolling her phone like the world didn't break last week. I crept to the side gate and used the spare key, Walter, and I hid behind the old cedar plank. The gate creaked, but the snow muffled everything. Inside, the house smelled different. New candles, air freshener, no trace of Walter's musk or my lavender laundry sheets. But I didn't stop to mourn. I had 10 minutes, maybe less. I went straight to the bedroom. My bedroom. She'd already stripped it of my quilts. Tossed out the curtains. But the dresser, the one with the warped drawer from 1992, was still there. Third drawer down. Push hard on the back panel, and it clicks. Walter showed me the trick when we hid Crystal's Christmas earrings years ago.
Click.
There it was. An envelope, slightly bent, tied with green string. Inside, the notarized last will and testament of Walter John Harwood. A copy of the house deed, amended. A small, folded letter. My hands trembled. I opened the letter first. It read, "Eunice, if they come for you, show them this. You built this place with me. You made it a home. Everything I am belongs to you. Don't let anyone forget that."
W.
My throat closed. Not with sadness. With fire. I wasn't just going to survive. I was going to take back everything that was mine. Suddenly, a voice. "Mom." I froze.
Crystal was at the door.
Her eyes widened when she saw me. "What the hell are you doing in here?" I stood up slowly, the envelope clutched to my chest. "Just collecting what's mine." "You can't just walk in." I held up the will. Her words died in her throat. Her face drained white. "Where did you get that?" she whispered. "Where he left it," I said coldly. "Because he knew you would do this." Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. Then I turned and walked past her. Down the stairs. Out the door.
She didn't follow.
I walked back to the road, the envelope tucked under my arm, and called Boyd from a payphone near the grocery store. "I've got it," I said. "Got what?" "Proof." He didn't ask more. He didn't need to. That night, I called a lawyer. If there's one thing I've learned at 78, it's this. Truth doesn't need to scream to win. Sometimes it just needs a signature, a notary stamp, and a little patience. The lawyer's office was 2 towns over, a quiet spot tucked between an old feed store and a barbershop that still smelled like talcum powder and aftershave. Boyd drove me there in his dented red pickup, humming along to Merle Haggard as snow fluttered down like confetti. "I ain't seen a woman walk straighter than you in weeks," he said as we parked. "I haven't felt this strong in years," I replied. The lawyer, Glenn Richfield, was in his late 40s, with salt and pepper hair, a gentle voice, and glasses that kept sliding down his nose. He welcomed me like a niece, not a client. When I handed him the envelope, he took off his glasses and read every word of the will, twice. When he looked back up, his face had changed. He wasn't gentle anymore. He was steel. "Eunice," he said, "this will is valid. Signed, notarized, witnessed, and clear as daylight. The house is yours. Every inch of it. Your daughter and son-in-law had no legal right to throw you out." I exhaled, finally. "So I can take them to court?" He smiled. "Not can, ma'am. Should." We filed the suit that afternoon. Unlawful eviction, elder abuse, and fraudulent possession of property. Glenn moved fast. Turns out he'd dealt with a few greedy children before. Entitlement, he called it. It's a disease. The case was scheduled for 2 weeks out. In the meantime, I stayed at the boarding house. Tess kept me fed, free biscuits, gravy, and enough coffee to keep my hands warm, and Boyd checked on me each evening. Every day I felt a little more like myself again. Not just a widow. Not just a mother. A woman who'd worked, sacrificed, built, and deserved better. On the morning of the hearing, I wore my Sunday coat, the same deep blue wool Walter bought me on our 40th anniversary. I pinned my silver hair back, held my chin high, and walked into the courtroom like I still owned something. Because I did. Crystal and Derek were already seated at the defendant's table. She wouldn't look at me. Derek stared at the floor like a schoolboy caught cheating. Their lawyer was a fresh-faced young man who looked like he'd never lived through a winter. When the judge entered, I whispered a silent prayer. Not for victory, but for peace. Glenn presented the will with clarity, outlining every detail. He showed photos of the house under construction, tax records with both mine and Walter's names, and even a letter Walter had written to Glenn the year before, confirming his intent to leave the property to me. Derek tried to speak once, arguing I was unwell and unfit, but Glenn shut him down so fast, even the judge raised an eyebrow. Then Crystal spoke. Not kindly, not with remorse. She said, "My mother never earned that house. My father built it. She just cooked and cleaned. That's not ownership." The room went still. Even the court clerk blinked at her. I stood, slow but firm. "Judge," I said, "may I speak?" He nodded. "I didn't just cook and clean. I scrubbed Walter's blood off the floor after chemo nights. I held roofing beams while pregnant. I painted every wall. I held the family together when Crystal was born early and Walter was laid off. I stitched curtains by hand. I shoveled snow at 5 a.m. before heading to work so my daughter could sleep longer." I paused, lifting my chin. I didn't build it with hammers. I built it with love, with grit. And if love and grit don't count as ownership anymore, then maybe the law doesn't know what a home really is. The judge didn't speak for several seconds. Then he cleared his throat. "Mrs. Harwood, thank you." When he ruled, it was short and sweet. The house was mine. Crystal and Derek had 24 hours to vacate. I was entitled to compensation for damages, both emotional and material. As we left the courtroom, Crystal brushed past me, her face pale, her lips trembling. "You destroyed our lives," she hissed. I turned to her, calm.
No, sweetheart.
"You did, when you forgot who I was." Outside, Boyd hooped loud enough to scare the pigeons. Tess sent a text, "Victory breakfast's on me." But I didn't feel like celebrating. Not yet. Because I hadn't returned to the house. Not truly. I needed to stand on that porch again. To walk through that front door, not as a guest, not as a ghost, but as the rightful woman of the home. It was strange stepping through the front door again. Not because it had changed so much, but because I had. 2 weeks ago, I stood on this same porch clutching a cold mug of tea, dazed and unwanted. Now, I stood taller, keys in hand, flanked by Tess and Boyd behind me like quiet guardians. Crystal and Derek were already gone. The judge gave them a day to vacate, and they didn't wait a minute longer. According to Glenn, Derek didn't even try to contest the decision after court. He just grumbled something about suing me for emotional distress.
Good luck with that.
When I opened the door, the wind caught it for a second, swinging it wide, like the house itself was exhaling. Everything was still. Quiet.
Too quiet.
Most of the furniture remained, but the place felt hollow, like someone had scooped out the warmth and left the walls standing like bones. The curtains were gone. The couch cushions were flipped wrong side out. The smell of artificial cinnamon hung in the air like an unwanted guest. Tess stepped inside and looked around. They didn't even clean. Boyd grunted. They never do. I wandered forward slowly. My hand grazed the banister. It was chipped, but I remembered when Walter carved that groove by accident. He was trying to fit a newel post and slipped. I told him to sand it down, but he laughed and said, "Nah, it's part of the story now." Every inch of this house held some memory, some piece of who we were. In the kitchen, I found my apron still hanging behind the pantry door. They hadn't touched it. Maybe they didn't even notice it was mine. In the living room, I touched the spot on the floor where Walter used to kneel to light the fire. And upstairs, I found the sewing room. They had turned it into an office. But under the desk, tucked in the corner, was a plastic storage bin. One I hadn't seen in years. I pulled it out, opened the lid, and gasped. Inside were photos. Dozens. Hundreds. Walter had saved every letter I ever wrote him. Every birthday card from Crystal. Drawings she made in second grade. A napkin from our anniversary dinner in 1989. A button from his Navy uniform. A church bulletin with a scribble that read, "You looked beautiful today. W." At the very bottom was a black notebook. Weathered leather. I hadn't seen it in years. When I opened it, my breath caught. It was Walter's journal. He wrote in it during the final weeks. I recognized the shaky handwriting. The first few pages were notes about medicine, appointments, and pain levels. But as I flipped further, his tone changed. He wrote, "If Eunice is reading this, it means I'm gone. And I hope you're sitting down, my love. Because there's something I never told you. I added Crystal to the old deed back in 2009. I was scared. You just had your heart scare, and I thought maybe it'd protect us. I meant to fix it. I swear I did. But I never did. Life got busy. And then Crystal started changing. I saw it, but I didn't want to admit it. That's why I rewrote the will. That's why I left the letter. I knew if anything happened to me, you'd need something solid. I'm sorry, Eunice. For the paperwork. For the burden. But I never doubted you could carry it." I closed the journal, pressing it to my chest. I sat there on the carpet, tears falling silently. Not from grief, but from gratitude. He knew. He knew the storm was coming. And he did everything he could to shelter me from it. By the time I stood up, something in me had shifted again. Not anger. Not revenge. Resolve. This house was mine. But it was more than a building. It was a living memory. A testament. And I wasn't going to let it rot in bitterness. I was going to breathe life into it again. Downstairs, I looked at Tess and Boyd. "I've made a decision." Tess raised a brow. "Oh, I want to turn this place into something new. Not just for me. For other women. For widows. For people who've been forgotten. A place where they can heal." Boyd's eyes lit up. "Like a home?" I nodded. "Exactly like a home." Because maybe the best revenge wasn't taking the house back. Maybe it was filling it with the kind of love that could never be evicted again. They say the hardest part of rebuilding isn't the work itself. It's deciding that the ruins are worth saving. For weeks after reclaiming the house, I woke up early, before the sun peeked over the pine trees behind the shed, just to stand in the living room and breathe. The silence had changed. It no longer pressed against me like a weight. It welcomed me, soft and wide like a familiar coat. I started by cleaning. Not just scrubbing floors and dusting windowsills, but cleansing the air of bitterness. I lit candles. I opened the windows, even in the cold. I played music again, Walter's old records mostly. Johnny Mathis, Patsy Cline. I even sang out loud once or twice. And then I remembered what I had said that day after reading Walter's journal. I want to make this place a home. Not just for me. So I did. I contacted the church. I reached out to the senior center. I put up a handwritten flyer at Lydia's diner. Need a hot meal? A safe place to rest? Come to the Harwood home. And they came. The first was Marla, a widow whose trailer had frozen over during a freak cold snap. Then came Shirley, who hadn't spoken to her kids in 10 years and was sleeping in the back of her station wagon. Then June, who had bruises under her makeup and didn't talk much, but peeled potatoes like it was her therapy. Each one brought something with them. A casserole dish.
A prayer.
A broken story. We laughed together. Cried together. We painted the walls pastel blue and floral cream. We replaced Crystal's ugly live, laugh, love prints with framed photos of moose sightings and quilts we stitched ourselves. Boyd fixed up the plumbing and built an extra bunk in the attic. Tess dropped off groceries every other day and stayed for tea on Thursdays. Even Glenn, the lawyer, sent a check every month to support whatever warmth you're building in that old house. We called it the Second Life Project. And somewhere in the middle of all that healing, I found my joy again. Not just the memory of it, the real thing. But healing isn't a straight line. And peace doesn't mean the past stays buried. It was a Wednesday. I was folding linens when I heard the knock. I opened the door expecting Boyd or a neighbor. But instead there she was. Crystal. She stood on the porch with a duffel bag slung over one shoulder, wearing the same blue winter coat I bought her in college. Her eyes were swollen. She looked smaller somehow. I froze. "What are you doing here?" She swallowed. Her voice cracked. "I'm not here to fight." Marla and Shirley peeked from the kitchen, but I held up a hand. "It's okay." Crystal stepped inside slowly, like she wasn't sure she was allowed to. She looked around the living room, taking in the changes, the women's shoes by the door, the laughter drifting down from upstairs, the fresh lilac scent in the air. "It looks different," she said. "It feels different," I replied. She nodded. "I guess that's fair." Silence stretched between us like a tightrope. Then she finally said, "I left Derek." My breath hitched. "I should have left him years ago," she went on. "He made me believe you were weak, that you were in the way. And I was angry."
At you.
At Dad. At myself. I didn't say anything. She stepped closer. "After court, I found something," she whispered. "In one of Dad's old boxes. A letter. Not addressed to you. It was addressed to me." She reached into her coat pocket and pulled it out, wrinkled and trembling in her hand. I took it and sat down slowly. The handwriting was unmistakable. Walter's. I opened it and read. "Crystal, if you're reading this, it means things didn't go the way I hoped. I want you to remember something. Your mother was the strongest person I ever knew. She didn't just raise you, she held up our whole family. Don't let bitterness make you blind. One day, you'll be older. You'll understand what sacrifice feels like. And if you ever hurt her, I hope you find the courage to make it right. She deserves that much."
Dad.
I looked up. Crystal was crying now. "For what it's worth, Mom, I'm sorry. I was wrong. About everything." My hands shook, but I didn't cry. I simply said, "You can stay. For tonight. We serve dinner at 6. We eat together here." She nodded, eyes wide, as if she'd stepped into a place she barely recognized. Maybe she had, because this house had changed. And so had I. Snow was falling again. Soft, slow, and steady, like the sky was exhaling peace. I sat in Walter's old rocking chair, now freshly reupholstered, and moved to the front porch. The house behind me buzzed with a quiet warmth of women I now called family. Laughter trickled through the window. June and Shirley were bickering over how much cinnamon belonged in hot cider. Tess was helping Marla set the table. Crystal had just come back from the store with fresh bread, her eyes tired but steady. It had been 3 months since the court ruled in my favor. 3 months since I turned the coldest chapter of my life into a story of rebirth. The Harwood home now had 5 regular residents and countless visitors. Local volunteers dropped by to help. The town council offered a small grant. A nurse from the clinic gave monthly checkups for the ladies. Even the pastor stopped by every other Sunday to lead what he called coffee church, just scripture, muffins, and old stories by the fireplace. But for me, peace didn't come with applause. It came with routine. It came with knowing that after a lifetime of silence, I had finally raised my voice and filled my home not with bitterness, but with purpose. Crystal was healing, too. Slowly. She never asked for forgiveness with big speeches or tears anymore. Instead, she asked with her hands, scrubbing floors, cooking breakfast, helping June braid her hair after a hospital appointment. She was earning her place back, not just in the house, but in my heart. One evening, she came to me holding an old shoebox. "I found it in the attic," she said quietly. "It's Dad's. I think this one's for you." Inside, wrapped in faded newspaper and tied with twine, was a small wooden box. Engraved on the lid, "To Eunice, when the house is full again." I opened it with trembling hands. Inside was a letter. Walter's handwriting, shakier now, but still him. "My love, if you're reading this, it means the house is full again, and you made that happen. I knew you would. You always were the heart of this place. You gave it warmth. You gave it meaning. And even if I'm not there beside you, I want you to know something. I never built this house for bricks and beams. I built it for you. Every nail I hammered, I was thinking about the life we'd make, the daughter we'd raise. The laughter in the hallways. The smell of your soup in the kitchen. You were always the home. Not the walls. Not the land.
You.
Keep the porch light on, love. In case someone else out there is lost and looking for you. Like I was all those years ago. Forever. Walter. I didn't cry like before. This time, the tears came slow. Grateful. Like spring melting snow. Crystal knelt beside me, her head on my knee like she used to do when she was 5 and scared of thunder. I think he knew I'd need this, I whispered. She nodded. Me too. That night, after dinner, I walked to the front porch, flipped the switch by the door, and watched the soft amber light flicker on. We never turned it off again. Because someone would come, one day, cold, lost, and forgotten, just like I was. And when they did, they'd know they were home. The Harwood home wasn't just mine anymore. It belonged to every woman who'd been told she was too old, too weak, too broken, too much. And as long as I drew breath, the porch light would stay on.